Chapter 4 of The Jewels of Aptor by Samuel R. Delany. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Reading by Matt Berard. Chapter 4. "That dream," Geo said to Urson a moment after the mate left. Urson looked down from his bunk. "You had it too?" Both turned to Snake. "I guess that was your doing, eh?" Urson said. Snake scrambled down from the upper bunk. "Did you go wandering around the deck last night and do some spying?" Geo asked. By now most of the other sailors had risen, and one suddenly stepped between Urson and Geo. "Excuse me, mate," he said, and shook the figure in the second berth. "Hey, Whitey, come on. You can't be that soused from last night. Get up or you'll miss mess." The young sailor shook the figure again. "Hey, Whitey!" The figure in the blankets was unresponsive. The sailor gave him one more good shake, and as he rolled over, the blanket fell away from the blond head. The eyes were wide and dull, the mouth half open. "Hey, Whitey!" the black sailor said again, and then he stepped back slowly. Mist enveloped the ship 3 hours out from port. Urson was called for duty right after breakfast, but no one bothered either Snake or Geo that first morning. Snake would slip off somewhere and Geo would be left to wander the ship alone. He was waiting beneath the dories when the heavy slap of bare feet on the wet deck materialized in Urson. "Hey," greeted his friend. "What are you doing under here?" "Nothing much," Geo said. Urson was carrying a coil of rope about his shoulder. Now he slung it down into his hand and leaned against the support shaft and looked out toward the fog. "It's a bad beginning this trip has had," he said. "What few sailors I've talked to don't like it at all." "Urson," said Geo, "have you any idea what actually happened this morning?" "Maybe I have and maybe I haven't," Urson said. "What ones have you?" "Do you remember the dream?" he asked. Urson scrunched his shoulders as if suddenly cold. "I do," he said. "It was like we were seeing through somebody else's eyes, almost." "Our little four-armed friend sees things in a strange way, if that's the case." "Urson, that wasn't Snake's eyes we saw through. I asked him, just before he went off exploring the ship. It was somebody else. All he did was get the pictures and relay them into our minds. And what was the last thing you saw?" "As a matter of fact," Urson said, turning, "I think he was looking at poor Whitey's bunk." "And who was supposed to be sleeping in poor Whitey's bunk?" "Snake?" "Exactly. Do you think perhaps Whitey was killed?" "Could be, I guess. But how? And why? And who?" "Somebody who wanted Snake killed. Maybe the same person who cut his tongue out a year and a half ago." "I thought we decided that we didn't know who that was." "A man you know, Urson," Geo said. "What man on this ship have you sailed with before?" "Don't you think I've been looking?" Urson asked. "There's not a familiar face on deck, other than maybe one I've seen in a dockside bar, but never one whose name I've known." "Think, Urson. Who on this ship you've sailed with before?" Geo asked again, more intently. Suddenly, Urson turned. "You mean the mate?" "That's just who I mean," said Geo. "And you think he tried to kill Snake? Why didn't Snake tell us?" "Because he thought if we knew, we'd get in trouble for it. And he may be right." "How come?" asked Urson. "Look, we know something is fishy about Argo. The more I think about it, the less I can put my hands on it. But if something is fishy about the mate too, then perhaps he's in cahoots with her. What about when he came into Argo's cabin last night when we were there?" "Maybe he was just doing what we said we were, walking by when he heard a noise. If it was his eyes we were seeing through, then he sees things awfully funny then.
Maybe he's a strange one too, like Snake, who hears things funny. Not all strangeness shows, Geo reminded him.
You could be right, said Urson. You could be right. He stood up from where he had leaned against a lifeboat support. Well, you think some more, friend, and I'll listen. I'll see you later. He hauled up his rope again and started off in the mist. Geo decided to search for Snake. A ladder led to the upper deck, and climbing it, he saw across the deck a tall, fog-shrouded figure. He paused and then started forward. Hello, he said. The captain turned from the railing and looked at him. Good morning, sir, Geo said. I thought you might be the mate. The captain was silent for a while, and then he said, Good morning. What do you want? I didn't mean to disturb you, if you were. No disturbance, said the captain. How long will it take us to get to Aptor? Another 3 weeks. Shorter if this wind keeps up. I see, said Geo. Have you any idea of the geography of Aptor? The mate is the only one on board that has ever set foot on Aptor and come off it alive, except Priestess Argo. The mate, sir? When? On a previous voyage he was wrecked there. He made a raft and drifted into the open sea, where he had the good fortune to be picked up by a ship. Then he will lead whatever party goes to the place? Not him, said the captain. He's sworn never to set foot on the place again. Don't even ask him to talk about it. Imagine what sort of a place it must be if probable death on the open sea is better than struggling on its land. No, he'll pilot us through the bay to the river's estuary. But other than that, he will have nothing to do with the place. 2 other men we had on board who'd been there and returned. They went with the priestess Argo in a boat of 13. 10 were dismembered and the pieces of their bodies were thrown in the water. 2 survived to row the priestess back to the boat. 1 was the sailor who died in the forecastle this morning. Not half an hour ago, I received news that the other one went overboard from the rigging and was lost in the sea. This is not a good trip. Men are not to be lost like coins in a game. Life is too valuable. I see, said Geo. Thank you for your information and time, sir. You're welcome, the captain said. Then he turned away. Geo descended the ladder again and walked slowly forward. Something touched him on the shoulder and he whirled. Snake! God damn it, don't do that! The boy looked embarrassed. I didn't mean to yell, Geo said, putting his arm around the boy's shoulder. Come on, though. What did you find? I'll trade you what I know for what you do. You sleep, came from Snake. I'm sorry, friend, laughed Geo, but I couldn't take a nap now if you paid me. Now tell me, whose eyes were we seeing through last night? The captain's? Snake shook his head. The mate's. Snake nodded. I thought so. Now, did he want to kill? Wait a minute, said Geo. Can the mate read minds too? Is that why you're keeping things from us? Snake shrugged. Come on now, Geo said. Do a little yelling and explain. Don't know, Snake thought out loud. Can see what he sees, hear what he hears, but no hear thoughts. I see. Look, take a chance that he can't read minds and tell me. Did he kill the man in the bed you should have been in? Snake paused for a minute, then nodded. Do you think he was trying to kill you? Snake nodded again. Did you know that the man killed this morning in your place was one of the 2 men who came back from Aptor with the priestess? Snake looked surprised. And that the other one drowned this morning, fell overboard, and was lost? Snake nearly jumped. What is it? Look for him all morning. He not dead. Hear thoughts, dim, low. Who's not dead? Geo asked. Which one? Second man. Did you find him? Geo asked. Can't find, Snake said. But alive, I know. One other question. Geo raised the jewel from where it hung against his chest. How do you work this silly thing? Think through it, said Snake. Geo frowned. What do you mean? Can you tell me how it works? You have no words, Snake said. Radio, electricity, diode. Radio, electricity, diode, repeated Geo, the sounds coming unfamiliarly to his tongue. What are they? Snake shrugged. Geo got a chance to report his findings to Urson that evening, and the big man was puzzled. Can you add anything? Geo asked. All I've had a chance to do is work, grumbled Urson. They were standing by the edge of the rail, beyond which the mist steeped thickly, making sky and water indistinguishable and grave. Hey, forearms, Urson suddenly asked. What are you looking at? Snake stared at the water, but said nothing. Maybe he's listening to something, suggested Geo. You'd think there were better things to eavesdrop on than fishes, said Urson. I guess Argo's given special orders that you two get no work. Some people. Let's go eat. As they started toward the convergence of sailors at the entrance of the mess hall, Urson said, Oh, guess what? He turned to Geo and picked up the jewel from the boy's chest. All you people are going around with such finery. I took my coins to the smithy and had him put chains on them. Now I'll strut with the best of you. He laughed and then went through the narrow way, crowding with the other sailors into the wide hall. For 2 weeks, nights without dreams left them early, and the boat rolled from beneath the fog. Dawn was gray but clear. Then, by one breakfast time, the ragged slip of Aptor's beach hemmed the horizon. On the wheel deck, the sailors clustered to the rail, and before them, rocks struck like broken teeth from the water. Urson, in his new triple neck chain, joined Snake and Geo at the rail. Whew, he said. Getting through them is going to be fun. Suddenly heads turned. Behind them now, Argo's dark veils, bloated with the breeze, filled about her as she mounted the steps to the wheel deck. The sailors moved away from her. Then, one hand on a stay rope, she stared across the gray water to the dark tongue of land. From the wheel the captain spoke. Geordie, disperse the men and take over the wheel. Aye, sir, said the mate. You, and you to the tops. He pointed among the men. You also, and you. Hey, didn't you hear me? Me, sir? Geo turned around. Yes, you. Up to the top spar there. You can't send him up, Urson called out. He's never been topside at all before. It's too choppy for any lad's first time up. He doesn't even know. And who asked you? Demanded the mate. Nobody asked me, sir, said Urson. But then you get below before I have you brigged for insubordination and fine you your 3 gold baubles. Don't you think I recognize dead man's gold? Now look here, Urson roared. Geo glanced from Argo to the captain. The bewilderment that flooded the face of the priestess shocked him. Geordie suddenly seized up a marlin pen, raised it, and shouted at Urson. Get down below before I break your skull open. Urson's fist sprang up. Calmly, Brother Bear, Geo began. And a bitch's ass. snarled Urson and swung his huge arm forward. Something leaped on Jordde from behind. Snake! The marlin pin veered inches away from Urson's shoulder. The flung fist sunk into the mate's stomach and he reeled forward, passing Urson, with Snake still clawing at his back. He reached the rail, bent double over it, and Snake's legs flipped up. When Jordde rose, he was free of encumbrance. Geo rushed to the edge and saw Snake's head emerge in the churning water. Behind him, Urson yelled, "Look out!" Jordde's marlin made an inch of splinters in the length of wood against which he had been leaning. "Not him!" cried Argo. "No, no, not him!" But Jordde had seized Geo's shoulder and whirled him back against the rail. Geo saw Urson grab a loose rope behind them and suddenly swing forward, intending to knock Jordde away with his feet. But suddenly Argo moved in the way of his flying body, turned, saw him, and raised her hands to push him aside so that he swung wide of them and landed on the railing a yard from where they struggled. Geo's feet slipped on the wet boards and he felt his body suddenly hurled backwards into the air. Then his back slapped water. As he broke surface, Urson, still on the rail, called to him, "Hang on, friend Geo, I'm coming." Urson's arm swung back and then forward as he dove into the sea. Now Geo could see only Argo and Jordde at the rail. But they were struggling. Urson and Snake were near him in the water. The last thing he saw was Jordde suddenly wrest something from Argo's neck and then fling it out into the sea. The priestess's hands reached for the flying jewel, followed its arc as she screamed toward the water. Then hands were at his body. Geo turned in the water as Snake disappeared from beside him and Urson suddenly cried out. Hands were pulling him down. Roughness of sand beneath one of his sides and the flare of sun on the other. His eyes were hot and his lids were orange over them. Then there was a breeze. He opened his eyes and shut them quick because of the light. Then he turned over, thought about pillows and stiff new sheets. Reaching out, he grabbed sand. He opened his eyes and pushed himself up from the beach with both hands spread in warm, soft crumblings. Over there were rocks and thick vegetation behind them. He swayed to his knees, the sand grating under his kneecaps. He looked at his arm in the sun, flecked with grains. Then he touched his chest. His hand came to one bead, moved on, and came to another. He looked down. Both the chain with the platinum claw and the thong with the wire cage hung around his neck. Bewildered, he heaved to his feet, and immediately sat down again as the beach went red with the wash of blood behind his eyeballs. He got up again, slowly. Carefully, Geo started down the beach, looking toward the land. When he turned to look at the water, he stopped. At the horizon, beyond the rocks, was a boat with lowered sails. So they hadn't left yet. He swung his eyes back to the beach. 50 feet away was another figure lying in the sun. He ran forward now, the sand splashing around his feet, sinking under his toes, so that it was like the slow motion running of dreams. 10 feet from the figure, he stopped. It was a young black, very dark, skin the color of richly humused soil. The long skull was shaved. Like Geo, he was almost naked. There was a clot of seaweed at his wrist, and the soles of his feet and one upturned palm were grayish and shriveled. Geo frowned and stood for a full minute. He looked up and down the beach once more. There was no one else. Just then the man's arm shifted across the sand. Immediately, Geo fell to his knees beside the figure, rolled him over, and lifted his head. The eyes opened, squinted in the light, and the man said, "Who are you?" "My name is Geo." The man sat up and caught himself from falling forward by jamming his hands into the sand. He shook his head and then looked up at Geo again.
Yes, he said. I remember you. What happened? Did we found her? Did the ship go down? Remember me from where? Geo asked. From the ship. You were on the ship, weren't you? I was on the ship, Geo said, and I got thrown overboard by that damn first mate in a fight, but nothing happened to the ship. It's still out there. You can see it. Suddenly, Geo stopped. Then he said, "You're the guy who discovered Whitey's body that morning." "That's right." He shook his head again. "My name is Iimmi." Now he looked out to the horizon. "I see them," he said. "There's the ship. But where are we?" "On the beach of Aptor," Geo told him. Iimmi screwed his face up into a mask of dark horror. "No," he said softly. "We couldn't be. We were days away from her." "How did you fall in?" "It was blowing up a little," Iimmi explained. "I was in a rig, when suddenly something struck me from behind, and I went toppling. In all the mist, they didn't see me, and the current was too strong for me, and..." He looked around. "You've been on this beach once before, haven't you?" Geo asked. "Once," said Iimmi. "Yes, once." "Do you realize how long you've been in the water?" Geo asked. Iimmi looked up. "Over 2 weeks," Geo said. "Come on, see if you can walk. I've got a lot of things to explain, if I can, and we've got some hunting to do." Iimmi steadied himself once more, and together they started up the beach. "What are you looking for?" Iimmi asked. "Friends," Geo said. 200 feet up, the rocks and torpid vegetation came down to the water, cutting off the beach. Scrambling over boulders and through vines, they emerged on a rock embankment that dropped 15 feet into the wide estuary of a ribbon of water that wound back into the jungle. 20 feet further, the bank dropped to the river's surface, and they both fell flat at the edge of a wet table of rock and sucked in cool liquid, watching blue stones and the white and red pebbles shivering 6 feet below clear ripples. There was a sound. Both sprang back from the water, turned and crouched on the rock.
"Hey," Urson said through leaves. "I was wondering when I'd find you."
Light through branches lay on the gold coins hung against his hairy chest.
"Have you seen Snake?"
"I was hoping he was with you," said Geo. "Oh, Urson, this is Iimmi, the other sailor who died 2 weeks ago." Both Iimmi and Urson looked puzzled. "Have a drink of water," Geo said, "and I'll explain as best I can."
"Don't mind if I do," said Urson.
While the bear man lay down to drink, Geo began the story of Aptor and Leptor for Iimmi. When he finished, Iimmi asked, "You mean those fish things in the water carried us here? Whose side are they on?" "Apparently Argo isn't sure either. Perhaps they're neutral."
"And the mate?"
asked Iimmi.
"You think he pushed me overboard after he killed Whitey?" "I thought you said he was trying to kill Snake," said Urson, who had finished drinking.
"He was," explained Geo. "He wanted to get rid of all three. Probably Snake first, and then Whitey and Iimmi. He wasn't counting on our fishy friends, though. I think it was just luck that it was Whitey he got rather than Snake. If he can't read minds, which I'm pretty sure he can't, he probably overheard you assigning the bunks for us to sleep in, Urson. When he found out he had killed Whitey instead, it just urged him to get Iimmi out of the way more quickly."
"I could have easily have been pushed," Iimmi agreed, "but I still don't see why."
"If there is a spy from Aptor on the ship, then Jordde is it," said Geo. "The captain told me he had been to Aptor once before. It must have been then that he was enjoined into their forces. Iimmi, both you and Whitey
had also been on Aptor's shore, if only for a few hours. There must be something that Jordde learned from the island that he was afraid you might learn, something you might see. Something dangerous, dangerous for Aptor. Something you might see just from being on the beach. Probably it was something you wouldn't even recognize, something you'd maybe not see the significance of until much later, but probably something very obvious. Now Urson spoke. "What did happen when you were on Aptor? How were those 10 men killed?" Though the sun was warm, Iimmi shivered. He waited for a moment, and then he began. "We took a skiff out from the ship and managed to get through the rocks somehow. It was evening when we started and the moon, I remember, had risen just above the horizon, though the sky was still deep blue. This light of the full moon is propitious to the white goddess Argo," she said from her place at the bow of the boat. "By the time we landed, the sky was black behind her, and the beach was all silvered by the light, up and down. Whitey and I were left to guard the skiff at the water's edge, and sitting on the gunwales, shoulders hunched in the slight chill, we watched the others go up the beach, 5 and 5, with Argo behind them. Suddenly there was a scream, and the first man fell. They came from the air like vultures. The moon was overhead by now, and a cloud of them darkened the white disk with their wings. They scurried after the fleeing men, over the sand. All we could really make out was a dark battling against the silver. There were swords raised in the white light, screams and howls that nearly sent us back into the ocean. But Argo and a handful of those men left began to run toward the boat. They followed them down to the edge of the water, loping behind them, half flying, half running, hacking one after another, down with swords. I saw one man fall forward and his head roll from his body while blood squirted 10 feet along the sand, crimson under the moon. One actually caught at her veils, but she screamed and slipped from it into the water now, and climbed back into the boat, panting. You would think a woman would collapse, but no. She stood in the bow while we rowed our arms off. They would not come over the water, apparently, and somehow we managed to get the skiff back to the ship without foundering against the rocks." "Our aquatic friends may have had something to do with that," said Geo. "Iimmi, you say her veils were pulled off. Tell me, do you remember if she were wearing any jewelry or not?" "She certainly wasn't," Iimmi said. "She stood there in only her dark robe, her throat as bare as ivory." "She wasn't going to bring the jewel to Aptor where those monsters could get their hands on it again," said Urson. "But Geo, if Jordde's a spy, why did he throw the jewel into the sea?" "Whatever reason he had," said Geo, "our friends have given it to me now." "You said Argo didn't know whose side these sea creatures were on, Leptar's or Aptor's," said Iimmi. "But perhaps Jordde knows, and that's why he threw it to them." He paused for a moment. "Friend, I think you have made an error. You tell me you are a poet, and it is a poet's error. The hinge in your argument that Snake is no spy is that Argo must have dubious motives to send you on such an impossible task, without protection, saying that it would be meaningful only if all its goals were accomplished. You reasoned. How could an honest woman place the life of her sister below the value of a jewel?" "Not just her sister," interrupted Geo, "but the goddess Argo incarnate." "Be patient," said Iimmi. "Only if she wished to make permanent her temporary condition, you thought, could she set such an impossible task. There may be some truth in what you say,
but she herself would not bring the jewel to the shores of Aptor, though it was for her own protection. Thanks to you, all three jewels are now in Aptor, and if any part of her story is true, Leptar is now in more danger than it has been in 500 years. You have the jewels, two of them, and you cannot use them. Where is your friend Snake who can? Both Snake and Geordie could easily be spies and the enmity between them feigned, so that while you focused on one, you could be misled by the other. You say he can move into men's minds? Perhaps he clouded yours." They sat silent for the lapsing of a minute. "Argo may be torn by many things," continued Iimmi, "but you, in watching some, may have been deluded by others." Light from the river quivered on the undersides of leaves. Urson spoke now. "I think his story is better than yours, Geo." "Then what shall we do now?" asked Geo softly. "Do what the goddess requests as best as we can," said Iimmi. "Find the Temple of Hama, secure the stone, rescue the young goddess, and die before we let the jewels fall into hands of Aptor." "From the way you described this place," muttered Urson, "that may not be far off." "Still," mused Geo, "there are things that don't mesh. Like why were you saved too, Iimmi? Why were we brought here at all? And why did Jordde want to kill you and the other sailor?" "Perhaps," said Iimmi, "the god Hama has a strange sense of humor, and we shall be allowed to carry the jewels up to the temple door before we are slaughtered, dropping them at his feet." He smiled. "Then again, perhaps your theory is the correct one, Geo, and I am the spy, sent to sway your reason." Urson and Geo glanced at each other. "There are an infinite number of theories for every set of facts," said the Negro. "Rule number one, assume the simplest. That includes all the known conditions to be true until more conditions arise for which your theory no longer holds. Rule number two, then, and not until, change it." "Then we go into the jungle," Geo said.
"I guess we do," said Urson. "Since we've got this job, we've got to trust ourselves and do it right. Let's see if we can put one more of those things around your neck before we're through." He pointed to the two jewels hanging at Geo's chest. Then he laughed. "One more and you'll be all the way up to me." And he rattled his own triple necklace. End of Chapter 4.